A friend and I have decided to buy land, build flats on that same piece of land. The expenses and profits are to be shared between the two of us. We have been friends for many years and I trust him. Should I, however, consider a joint venture? And what are the benefits or protections that a joint venture would afford me? Bruno?
Cool. So how many hours do we have to discuss this?
We're going to be gone by 12:30, so.
Okay, cool. All right, so short version, huh? All right, so maybe let me start right at the beginning, like back. So in our law at the moment, a joint venture is a kind of an anomaly. It's a strange concept that people throw around interchangeably, but they don't quite understand what the nature of a joint venture is. The same principle actually applies to things like stokvels. Now, why I bring this into an example is a joint venture is a layperson's understanding of a relationship with somebody else. Now, joint ventures can come in many different shapes and forms. You can do a joint venture individually just with someone by shaking hands and having a partnership with that person. Maybe it's not even a partnership because partnerships actually carry certain legal implications. You can do a joint venture in a company. You can do a joint venture in a trust. You can do a joint venture between two companies and simply have a contract that governs exactly what one is supposed to do and what the other is supposed to do. So that's just the first thing that I think we need to set as an underlying basis for this conversation is a joint venture in law is not a legal concept that has a strict definition attached to it. The same way that companies and partnerships and the like do. So when a person asks me, let's do a JV, we have to have a bigger discussion. Okay, what do you actually want to do? And how do you want to govern this relationship? So in a case like this, specific to the viewer, and obviously because of limited time, we need to try to be specific. We're looking at a situation where two people are deciding to do a project together, to contribute something towards the project, and to receive something out of it. So I would already start looking at two possible options here. So it would be either a partnership or it would be a company. Now, why I'm not a fan of partnerships in general in cases like this is the way that partnership law governs partnerships can sometimes be risky. Because if the partnership lands, so remember, you personally contributing to this partnership. So it's you and your partner in this personal relationship. And if anything happens to this partnership and the partnership itself can't pay its debts, they're going to come after the specific partners and they're going to be able to collect from their personal estates. Now, there are ways of trying to exclude this from happening, and it depends on how the partnership agreement is drafted. But the problem that I have is there's almost a presumption that a partnership has to be treated in a certain way. And if a third party wasn't aware of it, he can always try and argue and say, well, I understood it to be a partnership. I understood that both of them would be vested and that I can claim from both of them in case something goes wrong. So I normally feel a lot more comfortable with creating an entity like a company, for example, and having both people as shareholders in this company as 50% shareholders, and they can then go and actually operate this company and run this company. So that's my personal preference. You can do it both ways. The partnership, I feel, is just a bit more effort. Also, the reason why it's more effort is our company legislation at the moment, and this is where there's a similarity between Cilna's previous question, is the Rental Housing Act has certain prerequisites that it lays out. Now, with the Companies Act, it's very similar. So the Companies Act has a lot of rules, there's a lot of sections in the Act that allow and disallow certain things. Now, why that's a benefit is because a lot of the stuff you don't need to try reinvent the wheel to contract for, because it already exists in law. So you can rest on the fact that the legislation governs certain portions of the relationship and you only have to deal with other portions. Now with partnerships, it's less so. So there, you actually have to put in a lot of work to try figure out very specific rules of engagement, how you're going to work with this person. So that's now that's the basic summary on why companies versus partnerships. Now, when it comes to trust, and this is also a very interesting question that I often get is, I just want a one-pager because I've known this person for my whole life. We trust each other. I don't see anything going wrong. So again, it goes back down to, first of all, trust and relationships aren't always, they're not beyond reproach. Something goes wrong in relationships. I mean, people get married every day. They tell each other they love each other, and something goes wrong, right? And this is an inevitable part of life. So you can never guarantee that the person that you get into a relationship today is going to be the same person tomorrow, right? So that's the first thing that you need to bear in mind. So it is important to at least govern something. The second thing is you also want a perception to the outside world. So you want to create an entity that can carry on business in its own name, where you can actually sell shares and give it to somebody else. You can actually move forward and you create a special person to run this project, and that is the company. So that's also a benefit because it means that it continues in perpetuity. It doesn't necessarily need you to be involved, and that's a big plus when it comes to things like companies. And now the last reason, and this is also because Cilna and I are property specialists, and I've seen this happen a million times, an agreement. So if I go to Cilna and say, you know what, I want to invest in properties with you, and Cilna goes, yes, perfect. That sounds great. And it sounds like it's kind of a done deal. Now, we've agreed that we're going to invest in properties. We've agreed that's a 50-50 contribution, and we're going to take a certain amount out. But now there's questions that you need to deal with that I can assure you most people don't. So who, for example, is going to be responsible for acquiring finance? Is somebody going to sign as a surety, right? Where are you going to buy these properties? What area? What type of properties? Is it going to be an inner city building, a multi-let student accommodation, or a nice little suburban single-let property? Have you agreed on that? What level of risk? What returns are you going to be looking for? What if one person says yes and the other person says no? Now, what happens if you acquire a property and now you want to sell the property because one person sees doom on the horizon and wants to sell before the market in that area crashes, and the other person doesn't and doesn't want to sell? Who's going to be more responsible for the day-to-day operations? It's difficult to run a company and just say, we'll both do it, because then you're running a very inefficient company. There's certain tasks and certain roles need to be assigned. And that's where the legal premise comes in, where we run you through the project. And by the time we're done, you guys either won't ever want to work together, or you're going to have a nice set roles and ideals and a roadmap. And why roadmap's also important is because I had this conversation recently with guys from business partners, where there was no underlying contracts. And when one person passed away, the company required all decisions to be made unanimously, right? So now this company is at a dead standstill because they're waiting for an executive to be appointed for the shares to be transferred. And now the other shareholder cannot technically take the company forward because part of the shares are being held in an estate. So there, the company comes to a dead stop. If you structure the company properly in its operations through the MOI and shareholders agreements, you can actually set a roadmap where the company is, by definition, required to follow certain processes without everyone having to have a meeting and making decisions. One person can step in as a director and make a decision without it having to be unanimous, because you've decided ahead of time that we will buy certain properties for a certain amount in a certain area of a certain style with a certain return. And it's set in stone and no one can argue it. So business can continue as per normal. So trust has nothing to do with it. This is about setting out roadmaps and setting out your investment in a proper way that's documented, and creating something that can live on in perpetuity.
Exactly, Bruno. If I can add to that, I think the principle of great walls makes for great neighbors. The same rule applies. Great contracts makes for great friendships. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.